There are moments in history that are just defined by a single phrase. And today, we're going to dive into one of the most famous, and maybe one of the most misunderstood cries ever uttered. It's a declaration from a cross that has, well, it's echoed through centuries.
So picture this. It's about 3 in the afternoon. After hours of darkness and just this heavy silence on the cross, Jesus suddenly breaks that stillness with a loud voice, crying out these exact words. Now, to us, today, that sounds like the ultimate cry of someone who's been completely abandoned.
And that's really the big question, isn't it? Does this cry mean a moment of total divine separation, of just utter despair, or was something else entirely going on? The answer, as you're about to see, isn't found in how we hear it, but in how a first-century Jewish audience would have understood it.
What we're going to unpack here is that this was not some spontaneous cry of agony. No, this was a deliberate signal. It was a clear, powerful reference designed to trigger a very specific text in the minds of everyone standing there.
See, this all comes down to a really key cultural practice. Back in that time and place, you didn't have to recite a whole chapter of scripture. If you quoted the very first line, it was like giving a title. It immediately brought the entire psalm to mind for anyone listening.
It's really just like when someone starts saying, "Our Father which art in heaven." Your mind just automatically fills in the rest of the prayer, right? That is exactly what Jesus was doing, but with Psalm 22.
So here's the most crucial point. He wasn't crying out in confusion, wondering why God had walked away. He was directing everyone's attention, the priests, the crowd, his own followers, to a specific prophecy. He was basically saying, hey, pay attention. This right here, this is what the scriptures were talking about.
All right, so let's actually do it. Let's look at the verses inside Psalm 22, a text written 1,000 years earlier, and just see how incredibly detailed this prophecy of the crucifixion really was. We'll just go verse by verse, and you'll see the connections. It's amazing.
So the psalm kicks off by describing the scene. Psalm 22, verse 7, talks about public mockery, total scorn, and even that very specific gesture of the crowd shaking their heads at him.
And then, boom, here's the fulfillment recorded right in Matthew 27:39. The gospel account perfectly mirrors the prophecy, the people passing by did the exact thing the psalm said they would do.
But it gets even more specific than that. In Psalm 22, verse 8, it actually records the very words the mockers would use, taunting him about his faith in God's deliverance.
And again, we see this fulfilled practically word for word in Matthew's account of the crucifixion. The chief priest and scribes are quoting the very things written in that psalm centuries before. I mean, the parallel is just stunning.
Okay, now this is one of the most direct and powerful lines in the entire psalm. Verse 16 describes the method of execution with just shocking clarity. They pierced my hands and my feet.
And here's what's so wild about that. You have to understand the timing. Psalm 22 was written long before crucifixion was even invented by the Persians, let alone perfected as a form of execution by the Romans. This is a prophecy of a very specific future event. It's incredible.
The prophecy keeps going, zooming in on even the small details, like the actions of the soldiers at the foot of the cross. Psalm 22, verse 18 says they would divide up his clothing and gamble for his tunic.
And yep, just as it was foretold, the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verses 24, records that this is precisely what the Roman soldiers did. It's yet another detail from this ancient text fulfilled right before their eyes.
But here's where it all pivots. This is the part that changes everything. Because anyone in that crowd who actually knew Psalm 22, they wouldn't just be thinking about the suffering. They would know that the psalm takes a massive, dramatic turn.
You see, the first 21 verses are a lament. They are a gut-wrenching description of agony. But right after that, the entire mood shifts. The story does not end in despair, and this is the key that unlocks the whole meaning of his cry.
Just listen to this verse. Psalm 22:24 is a straight-up declaration of faith and victory. It directly says that God has not hidden his face, that he has heard the cry of the afflicted. I mean, that is the literal opposite of abandonment.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. What was Jesus really doing with that loud cry from the cross? It wasn't a question coming from a place of doubt. It was a powerful final declaration.
So by quoting that first line, he was basically saying, I am the one this psalm is about. He was calling the religious leaders to account, showing them that what they were doing was actually the fulfillment of Scripture, not the failure of his mission. And he was affirming that his relationship with the Father was completely unbreakable.
So when you hear those famous words, don't hear a man who was defeated. Hear a teacher giving his final lesson. Hear a king declaring the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy for the entire world to see.
Because by invoking the entire psalm, he wasn't just pointing to his suffering. He was also pointing to what comes after that suffering, a vision of triumph and victory that stretches to the ends of the earth.
The psalm, and the incredible story it tells, it doesn't end with a question of why. It concludes with the declaration of what has been accomplished. It ends on this powerful note of finality, of purpose. A message declared to a future generation, to our generation, that he hath done this. It was finished.